in the majority of this tournament. However, he knows it very, very well.
Yes. On your right, you see Peter Ingram. He's playing an aggressive Naya build. He has 4 main deck copies of Thundermaw Hellkite to complement threats like Boros, Reckoner, and Flinthoof Boar. He's also playing 4 main deck copies of Domrad.
Yeah, and both these players sitting at 12-1-1, they have, even if they lose, there is a chance that they can still make top 8 because they'll have a 12-2-1 record. However, they're not a lock, and you might still be playing for the #1 seed overall.
Yeah. Costa, I believe, has a reasonable shot of still making the elimination rounds, even if he loses, because he should be near the top of the standings with tiebreakers. But there's a lot of variables, again, that go into this, and so nothing's a guarantee. And you see these 2 players playing for both seeding and to lock in their elimination round berth.
So Matt Costa just has a Steam Vents on turn 1. Peter Ingram matches him with a Stomping Ground and an Arbor Elf, which is really good in his deck because it can crank out some pretty good 3-drops on turn 2, like Boros Reckoner.
Yes.
Looks like we have Augur Bolus from Costa, which reveals a Pillar of Flame, which can potentially take out that Arbor Elf next turn.
So we'll see if Ingram has one of his powerful 3-mana plays, and he does in Boros Reckoner.
Yeah, I think he has Boros Reckoner and Loxodon Smiter at the 3-drop, along with Domrad.
Yeah, so a lot of powerful plays to accelerate into.
Here we see a Pillar of Flame taking out an Arbor Elf. Looks like Costa has multiple War Leader's Helix, along with an Azorius Charm in his deck, in his hand. So here it looks like Ingram has a Voice of Resurgence here too. Let's see if he decides to cast it prior to combat to play around Azorius Charm, and he does.
So that's an excellent play there from Ingram. It forces Costa both to use the Azorius Charm to cycle instead of put on top, and now kind of squeezes Costa quite a bit. The blue-white-red flash deck, as we've seen all weekend long, likes to play on its opponent's turn with all of its mana on tap, and Voice of Resurgence really compels the blue-white-red deck to act on its own turn where it's much less efficient.
Yeah, Voice of Resurgence is a very awkward card against any deck with counterspells in it because obviously you want to have all your mana untapped on your opponent's turn. Unfortunately, Voice doesn't really allow for that, so Matt's going to have to cast his spells on his main phase, so we're going to likely see a War Leader's Helix, probably targeting the Boros Reckoner. And again, Boros Reckoner can redirect that damage, however, Costa's gaining 4 life off the War Leader's Helix, so it's not that big a deal here. It's only, the question is Peter going to go after the Augur Bolus or redirect the 4 damage back to Costa?
Yeah. There is a pretty compelling argument to go after the Augur because the 1/3 is currently holding off the 2/2 Voice of Resurgence.
Yeah,
so.
I like going after the Augur because 1, it gets rid of a blocker, plus you assure that there's not going to be any Restoration Angel shenanigans, which is one of the ways that Costa's deck can kind of churn out card advantage.
Yeah, so you see Ingram agrees with you and takes out the Augur.
Another good draw here by Ingram. He has a Huntmaster of the Fells. Very good card against blue-white-red flash because it's not one of those cards that you can easily 1-for-1. And Costa doesn't have a lot of Wrath effects in his deck. He has 1 Supreme Verdict.
Yeah. So you see all the threats that Ingram has deployed so far, somehow durable against 1-for-1 spot removal, where it's Reckoner, who's awkward to burn out, Voice of Resurgence, that's obviously durable against removal, Huntmaster of the Fells, which generates 2 threats. Everything very good against 1-for-1 spot removal.
Yeah, and cards like Smiter or Thundermaw Hellkite, even though they're technically vulnerable to 1 removal spell, they're still tough to deal with. They're specific removal spells. Like Loxodon Smiter, I believe the only way that Costa can actually deal with it is either with a War Leader's Helix or a Turn and Burn. He only has 2 copies of each in his deck, so doesn't have those Mizium Mortars to sort of deal with 4 toughness creatures.
Right.
So Matt Costa draws for the turn, still has that second War Leader's Seal in his hand, also has an Azorius Charm. But again, with Voice of Resurgence in play, Azorius Charm's not really effective.
Gonna cycle an Azorius Charm.
And Think Twice, yet another card that's not very effective with Voice of Resurgence in play. So he's gonna just have to cast that main phase if he wants to cast it at all. So he's going to pass here with a Syncopate War Leader's Helix, which he can't cast currently, and a Azorius Charm, and I believe a Think Twice in his hand.
And I believe the reason that he didn't cast that Think Twice there is because of the risk of Thundermaw Hellkite. He'd rather leave up Syncopate for 1.
Yeah, so even though it will trigger the Voice of Resurgence, at least you deal with the Thundermaw Hellkite.
Yeah.
So Peter Ingram is free to attack for 5, dropping Costa to 12. Now he has the decision, does he want to get that Smiter into play, or does he want to cast a Huntmaster of Fells?
Yeah, and at this point, Ingram's very far ahead on the board. He has to be just kind of mulling over Supreme Verdict, how that influences his plays and what he wants to leave left over because I don't think he needs to add very much to his board beyond this point to threaten lethal.
Yeah, Huntmaster is a great follow-up to Wrath of God, so not surprised there that he decided to cast the Smiter instead. And that's the thing about Costa's deck. He has one Supreme Verdict to sort of keep the creature decks honest. However, Ingram doesn't know how many copies he has in his deck, so he has to play around Supreme Verdict regardless.
Correct.
So here it looks like we're going to see a Think Twice here. Costa trying to draw some answer here. It looks like we have a Counterflux. Again, not a very effective card right now. Ingram has enough threats in play. He also has a Voice of Resurgence that can trigger off any of the counter spells. So it looks like Costa's not even going to be able to cast. It looks like the War Leader's Helix is really the only card that's going to be able to cast right now. He's going to take out the Lockdown Smiter, gain 4 life, go up to 16. So still gaining a little life, has a little bit of a cushion here. But wow, great draw here for Peter. He draws a Domri Rad, which allows him to commit a threat to the board, but not necessarily expose himself to a Wrath of God.
Right, actually gives him a lot of staying power potentially against a Supreme Verdict. So
yeah, and with just 2 permission spells in Costa's hand, he doesn't really have a way to interact with the Domri Rad right now.
Yep.
And I think with an Avacyn Pilgrim, I think you're kind of free to just cast that Avacyn Pilgrim right now. There's really no reason to hold that back necessarily. I think you could, it's a 1/1 beater. You already have a follow-up, plus you have Domri Red in play already. Yep. I wouldn't mind casting the Avacyn Pilgrim here.
I like adding it to the board. It's very unlikely to be that powerful of a follow-up in the event that Costa actually does have Supreme Verdict.
But Peter decides to just pass the turn.
It does also cut the clock from 3 turns to 2, which is meaningful as well.
So it looks like we have Turn and Burn here. Turn and Burn will be able to deal with the Boros Reckoner without the damage being redirected. He can make it an 0/1 and then deal 2 damage to it if he chooses, or he can deal with the Voice of Resurgence once and for all, and sort of turn on those counter spells, so to speak. Let's see what he chooses to do here. Looks like he's just going to flashback Think Twice, try to draw a more effective answer. Looks like another Azorius Charm. Again, not really where you want to be when you're facing down a Voice of Resurgence, but it does give him a potential removal spell if he needs to.
Costa very furiously digging for his Supreme Verdict. Snapcaster Mage would also not be a terrible draw here, as it would give him a little bit of, he could flash back a Helix and give himself a little bit of breathing space, but the number of draws he has at this point that are very powerful are being reduced, in large part because of the pressure that Voice of Resurgence is putting on the way that he plays his turn.
Yeah, a Snapcaster would be great just because he can get that Pillar of Flame, but unfortunately he's going to have to just waste a burn on the Voice of Resurgence, netting Peter a Elemental token, which is currently a 2/2. Yet another reason why I think if that Avacyn Pilgrim was in play, it'd be a little bit better, because he'd be attacking for 7 right now.
Yeah.
And there's a Thundermaw, wow. And he does have a land to play around Syncopate. However, Costa does have the Azorius Charm,
right, but
we know about.
I think Costa's play very loudly signals that he's trying to Azorius Charm the token, and so it makes a lot of sense to commit Thundermaw this turn.
Yeah, and again, if Costa does Azorius Charm the Thundermaw, because Peter didn't activate his Domri Red pre-combat, he can activate the Domri Red and then just draw into the Thundermaw.
Yep.
And ensure himself that he gets another draw next turn. So yep, that's exactly what happens. Thundermaw goes on top of Peter's deck. Matt ends up getting attacked for a 6 this turn, drops to 3, and then Domri Red gets activated. Yep, there's no Supreme Verdict for Costa. Costa's just going to pass the turn back. Basically knows he's losing, but still forcing Peter to attack. And again, you've seen this before, Reduke, same thing. He never concedes, he forces the opponent to kill him, which I like. I mean, unless you're considering like certain time considerations, I like forcing your opponents to just make the right play all the time.
It's curious, because the blue-white-red flash deck has so many instants, especially Restoration Angel, Helix, Azorius Charm, Snapcaster Mage, it's actually valuable information to see how your opponent proceeds in situations like this where you know the contents of their hand, they're representing lethal, how much they're willing to add to the board additionally, what kind of cards they're playing around. Actually meaningful information. So I like Costa forcing him to play it out here.
You're just getting more information, and you get to see how your opponent's going to play in these situations if they come up in the next few games. So I definitely like the fact that Costa's just making Peter go through the motions here. And Peter's going to attack, and Matt now has nothing else, so he's going to scoop it up. So Peter Ingram goes up 1 game against Matt Costa playing Domri Naya. So pretty good start for Peter. He had the turn 1 Mana Accelerant, and he had the turn 2 Boros Reckoner. And Costa He drew the counterspell portion of his deck when he really needed the removal portion, the heavy portion of his deck. So, a little unfortunate because you saw Voice of Resurgence playing a real big role in that matchup.
So what appears to be happening is, I believe the players are now intentionally drawing. It's possible Costa was attempting to play the match for the purposes of seeding, and is now accepting Ingram's draw, which locks Ingram in the top 8.
Yeah, so it looked like Costa was guaranteed to be in top 8 regardless of a win or a loss, whereas Ingram probably had worse breakers. I believe Ingram probably offered the draw after winning because for him, he doesn't care. He just wants to make top 8. Costa knows I'm already down a game. The odds of me winning the match are probably lower now, so let me just take the draw and assure myself a top 4 seeding.
Yeah. So congratulations to Matt Costa and Peter Ingram, both of them locking up top 8 berths.